Hello and welcome to Who Is Best, a show where I, Claudine, take games that give you choices and rate those choices in a tier list. Today we will be tackling the ever-ambitious Chrono Cross. This sequel to Chrono Trigger was a disappointment to some and a masterpiece to others. It's a little rough around the edges and lacks the polish of Chrono Trigger, but is nonetheless a fantastic RPG. There are 45 possible party members in this game. The battle system is a little different and would take a while to explain, but here's the gist. Each character has one of 6 colors, or elements, and a grid that determines the actions they can take. This grid varies in quality. If you'd like an in-depth understanding of the game, I'd recommend Resonant Arc's review. Anyway, we will be ranking characters on stats, element, grid quality, techniques, accessibility, and overall usefulness. So let's get started with the tier. Pip started off as an idea and turned into a waste of time. Pip can evolve throughout the game depending on what elements are used by and on him. This mechanic and its stats that come along with it are broken and pretty much make the character useless overall. Pashul is also a disappointing character to say the least. He's a yellow physical attacker, which is all too common, so he ends up being overshadowed by pretty much everybody. I'm not sure why Sneff is in this game. Do you think they ran out of ideas and thought, how about a meth addict? He's a yellow with poor stats and stamina recovery, a terrible grid, and probably a beat-up Camaro in the garage. Orcha has a poor grid, below average stats, and a luck-based skill that is practically worthless. Van is the worst green in the game with average stats and a cruddy grid. The final member of the tier is Turnip. Poor agility and terrible stamina recovery are accompanied by average stats and grid layout. The Low Tier. A decent attack stat and grid keep Neo from being in the tier, but just barely. Doc is another character rescued from the tier because of average stats. He has high HP and an okayish grid. Mel has the highest magic stat of the yellow variety, which isn't really that great. Other than that, she has average stats overall. Sprigg is a unique character, but unlike Pip, her uniqueness is useful. The ability to change into enemies can be strong in the early game, but she quickly becomes useless as you approach mid and late game. Skelly is perhaps the most unfortunate character of the lot so far. He takes a while to piece together. He's a black, which houses some of the best characters in the game, and he has average or below average stats overall. Much like everyone else on this list so far, there is almost no reason to use Zappa. There is nothing about him that is above average. I guess the best thing you can say about him is he's the most well-rounded terrible character. Janice has an incredibly good grid that is perfect for any magic user. Unfortunately, her magic stat is abysmal, making her weakness a stark contradiction to her strengths. Luccia has the same problem as Janice. She has an absolutely amazing grid with the worst stats imaginable to back it up. If you're looking for a somewhat useful yellow, then Funguy, yes, his name is Funguy, is a good pick. But honestly, why would you want someone like this when there's so many more to go? Orcha is a balanced meh character. He isn't very good at anything to stand out, though he isn't bad enough to belong in the tier. He's just kind of there. Pierre is a pretty crappy character, though full of potential. With the right equipment and his awesome stamina recovery, he is yanked from the tier. If you want to put some work in, you can make him viable, but the work up front is a little ridiculous. The final member of the low tier is Mojo the Voodoo Doll. Aside from some fantastic HP and decent stamina regeneration, he brings almost nothing else to the table. The Mid Tier. Draggy has great stats and the best stamina recovery in the game. His grid is difficult and he has pretty low agility, but overall he is a decent party member. Greco has a pretty horrible grid, terrible speed, magic, and stamina recovery. The reason he is here in the mid tier is because he has overall the best physical stats in the game. If you're looking for a red physical attacker, look no further. Radius is the most middle of the road green of the lot. He has above average stats and a decent grid, but overall he never rises to any substantial place on this list. Razzly is a cute fairy with deceptively bad stats. Though it is true that she doesn't excel statistically, she more than makes up for it in stamina recharge and techniques, which are some of the better techs in the game. For yellows, Viper is above average, but for all the rest, he is basically your average character. Norris beats out Viper as one of the better yellows in the game. He has pretty good stats and a really good stamina recovery. Stack on a few decent skills and he might take the cake as the top yellow. Macha is underrated to say the least. She is statistically one of the best characters in the game. The big issue is that as a red, she has some steep competition. Nikki is a perfect example of a mid-tier character when it comes to Chrono Cross. He has average stats and capabilities as a blue caster. Nikki beats some characters while being beat out by others. Leah is a yellow that is worth using. I know, shocking. She makes a decent physical attacker and beats out the rest of the yellows if you're committed to using them. Leah's equal, perhaps slight superior, is Zoah. Again, if you're looking for a decent yellow, look no further. He wrecks enemies physically, though he has a pretty mediocre grid and stamina recharge. But I guess that doesn't matter too much for a yellow. You obtain Stina late in the game, which makes it difficult to place her. In essence, she is a lesser Serge with above average stats and a decent grid. Ultimately, it would be hard to find a reason to use her despite her usefulness because of how late you get her. Next is Miki, who is a red with great stats, especially magic, great stamina recovery, and great speed. She'd have made it into the top tier if it wasn't for her grid, which leaves a lot to be desired. The final member of the mid tier is Starkey. He's pretty decent with good stats, skills, and grid. He's a white innate, which is a plus and a minus. White innates are the better party members, but he's beat out by most other whites, so I decided to keep him here in the mid tier. The top tier. Irenes would make it to the top tier on looks alone. This aside, she also makes it to the top tier because of her fantastic grid and great stamina recovery. She is an awesome caster, though being a blue, she is up against some of the best characters in the game. Despite this, she still made it to the top tier. Barely. Grobik fills an interesting spot. He is one of the best physical damagers of the blacks. He has poor magic and magic defense, but awesome physical stats, decent stamina, and an above average grid. Orhla is a lesser Fargo. She is a blue innate with impressive stats and stamina, though her grid, like Fargo's, isn't all that great. She is missing the all-important pillage ability, which puts her below Fargo. Karsh really only has one bad thing going for him. He has a below average stamina regain. But that aside, his grid and stats are amazing. He is never a bad choice for your party. Fargo is by far the hardest character to place. I nearly put him in the God tier for pillage alone, but in the end his terrible grid holds him back. He ties with the next character and Orhla as most useful blue innate. And speaking of the next character, Marcy is a controversial character to put in front of Fargo, but in the end her great grid, high agility, high stamina recovery, high accuracy, and well just high everything except for HP, just edges her out as the best blue innate in the game. Greco is a perfect example of a black innate. He has awesome stats and is an amazing caster. He has a really awesome grid, though it is going to take a lot of work to get to the point where you can benefit from it. But with that being said, he is a solid choice for any team. Kid is going to be another controversial placement. She has one of the best grids in the game and has amazing stamina recharge. She's a bit of a glass cannon. The main reason she is here is because of her availability throughout the game. Let's just say she isn't around when you usually need her. Riddel is one of the more impressive characters in this list and finishes off our top tier. She is probably the second best caster in the game with awesome stats, stamina recovery, and grid. I'd recommend her for an optimal caster party. The God tier. First on the God tier is Lena. She may not seem all that amazing at first glance, but her skills are practically broken. Maiden Faith and Maiden Heart are indispensable. Physically, she suffers, but when considering what she brings to the table, Lena is your best option for a caster, period. Glenn is notorious in the Chrono Cross community. First of all, to get him, you must give up on Kid, which is a debatably controversial development choice, seeing as all signs point to it being the wrong answer. But that aside, Glenn is similar to Karsh in stats and grid, though he has a much better stamina recovery. What sets Glenn in the God tier is his late game ability, Dual Wield, which gives him a high crit chance in battle. He is arguably the best party member in the game. Next is Serge and Lynx, who are no different from each other when it comes to stats, grid, stamina, and skills. Serge ranks higher than everyone else in almost every aspect. He has the second best grid in the game and amazing stats overall. Seeing as he'll be a permanent member of your party, this is definitely a good thing. The final member of the God tier is Harle. The best grid in the game, alongside amazing techniques mixed with the best stats in the game, make her the best party member, and there is no contest. Like, at all. The big issue is accessibility. Harle isn't around for a large majority of the game, making her a difficult choice. But even with that against her, her abilities cannot be placed anywhere but the God tier. And that's my list. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment below of what characters you like and what your optimal party were. Also, like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you all later.